This morning we'll be talking about the performance-based pathway guidance and tools. The purpose of this webinar is to introduce you to these new tools. I'm Linda Drake. I work with graduation requirement policy for the State Board of Education, and I'm here with some colleagues. Go ahead, Alyssa, and introduce yourself.
Morning all, I'm Melissa Muller. I'm the director of the Master-Based Learning Collaborative at the State Board of Education. And I see our executive director has joined us. Randy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning. I'm Randy Spalding, executive director for the State Board of Education, and welcome and thank you for joining us. Maria, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, good morning. My name is Maria Muto. I serve as the Secondary School Counseling Program Supervisor at OSPI. I'm happy to be here to provide any support that I can, and I'll pass it off to my colleague at OSPI, Clarice.
Morning, everybody. Clarice Leong. I work with Maria at OSPI, and I probably have spoken to a lot of you through email, the graduation pathways email, and do a lot of the technical assistance. Welcome.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have probably about 20 minutes of presentation, and then we'll probably have a pause and some quiet time for you all to look at the guidance and just review it. We sent out a link to the guidance in reminders for this webinar, so hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the guidance, but we will have a chance for you to quietly review it for about 5 minutes. And then we'll get into questions and answers, and we'll just go through and answer as many questions as we can. I do ask for your patience. I work with policy. Some of my colleagues are more have more expertise in teaching and learning, but I'm a policy person myself. So there may be questions that we can't answer right away. So if there is, we'll take down your questions and we'll circle back with you. We also will be updating the FAQ for the performance-based pathway with questions that come up. So to get on with our presentation, I'll give you some background information. As you all know, the Washington State High School Diploma has 3 big parts to it: the high school and beyond plan, credit and subject area requirements, and the graduation pathway options. And today, of course, we're focusing in on a new graduation pathway option. So the legislation that established the new pathway option also clarified the intent of graduation pathways. They're intended to be student-focused, adaptable, rigorous, meaningful ways for students to demonstrate appropriate readiness in support of their individualized career and college goals. So the new performance-based pathway, I think, is a really good option that helps support this intent. So it was established in House Bill 1308, and the performance-based pathway is intended to allow students to show what they know and can do in a real-world, hands-on way that aligns with their individual goals for after high school. And it's intended to be customizable and relevant, engaging to the student. It can take a variety of forms, such as a project or work-related experience, and it can result in a variety of student work that can be evaluated. It could be a performance, a video, a presentation, a portfolio. It's intended to be flexible in how it's delivered, so it may or may not be completed as part of a class where a student also earns credit. It could also be, a project that the student does largely outside of school. So it is intended to be flexible, not only for the student, but also in the delivery of the opportunity. Prior to offering the performance-based graduation pathway, school districts do need to adopt a local policy. The Washington State School Directors Association has developed a model policy. It's Model Policy and Procedure 2415. So if your district is a member of WASDA, they should have access to that. If your district is not a member of WASDA, you can contact WASDA and they will provide you with a copy of that model policy. So this is a list of all the graduation pathway options, and the new performance-based pathway is one of the ones that can be used in combinations with others. So it is an option that can allow students to meet the graduation pathway in English or math, or if it was deliberately designed, it could meet both of them, but it can be used in combination with others. So for example, a student could meet their English pathway requirement with the performance-based pathway and meet their math requirement through the state assessment. And I think Maria had a quick reminder here.
Yeah, I just wanted to plug that there was a change last year to the high school and beyond plan. And as you know, or have probably heard before, the high school and beyond plan and the graduation pathway are supposed to align. The high school and beyond plans now begin by 7th grade. That's a change from previous legislation that said by 8th grade. And districts should provide that information on graduation pathways that are open to students by 8th grade, but strongly encouraged by 6th. And just some questions that I thought would be helpful for folks who are planning to integrate this pathway sooner rather than later, as you're thinking as the years are coming by. How are middle schools and high schools communicating about these pathways? What data from the middle school can be used to support the primary scheduling that you're doing and planning ahead for these pathways the students are interested in? And what kind of opportunities does that open? I just wanted to throw that out there for some creative thinking as you're planning to incorporate this.
Let's see. Sorry. Okay, so House Bill 1308 directed the state board to establish graduation proficiency targets and associated rubrics aligned with state learning standards in English language arts and math. And so that is sort of the core of what we're doing today. That is the guidance that was released that addresses this direction by the legislature. The State Board of Education also wrote rules for the performance-based pathway. And in our rules, we specify that the rubrics and proficiency targets developed by the State Board must be used. So the guidance that we're sharing with you today, the proficiency targets, the learning standards, these are all things that must be part of the performance-based pathway. So I think that Stephanie already shared a link to where you can find this on our website. The full documents look like this, so you can take a look. The process for developing this started in summer of last year. We had planning conversations and started looking at drafting the rules and gathering information from other states. We partnered with Great Schools Partnership to do this work. They have experience and expertise in this kind of work and have worked with other states developing this kind of guidance. So we started working with them in the fall. We also consulted with state practitioners. We particularly contacted districts that have culminating projects, so that we felt that there was some overlap there between the performance-based pathway and culminating projects. So we consulted with districts that have well-developed culminating projects, also with schools and districts that are employing mastery-based learning and project-based learning. We also worked with WASDA to create the model policy, and the rules were finalized in December. So as you look through these, there are, you'll see that it's broken out there are focus standards list. So there were particular learning standards in math and English that were identified as the focus standards for the performance-based pathways. The guidance includes rubrics. These are a set of scoring criteria that educators can use to evaluate students' final projects. The task models outline the required components of each student's work and kind of show what the projects might look like. And then the student checklists. These are simple checklists that will help students manage their project and ensure that all the components of the performance-based pathway are completed. So the focus standards for English, there are some standards that will be common to all the performances, and then there are some choice standards. So there are two reading standards for informational text, two writing standards, and one language standards. And then based on what the student chooses, if they're doing primarily a written text or an oral video or visual presentation, then you would choose either the speaking and listening standard or an additional writing standard. For the math focus standards, there needs to be some locally determined scoring, locally determined identified learning standards in of two high school level, a minimum of two high school level learning standards in two conceptual categories, and that the scoring criteria would be identified locally. If possible, all 8 mathematical practices should be demonstrated by the student work, and at minimum 5 mathematical practices. Those mathematical practices would be assessed using the statewide rubric. So evaluating a math performance-based pathway would be a combination of locally determined scoring criteria for those locally identified learning standards, and then the statewide rubric for the mathematical practices. So at this time, we wanted to let you take a look again, maybe start getting your thoughts and orders about what questions you may have. We'll put another link to the guidance in the chat. And so I think I'll just have about 5 minutes here where folks can look at the guidance, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes. Okay, so I hope you found the guidance. We put the link to our webpage in there. The packet is available as the full packet. So you'll see the list on our webpage. The full packet has everything. And then below the full packet, the different parts are broken out. So you could download or look at each of the different parts of the full packet. Some of it is available as Word files. So the rubrics and the student checklists are available as Word files. So you can download them and use them individually as Word files. And then the general guidance, the task models are all available as PDFs. As you have questions, please use the Q&A function. That way everybody can see it and we can keep a good record and keep track of what we've answered and haven't answered. Now, when you registered, we also gave you an option to ask questions in the registration. So we'll start with some of the common questions that were from the registration, and then we'll get to the questions in Q&A. So please continue to ask questions in the Q&A function. And we'll start by answering some of these common questions from the registrations. Can the standards in math and ELA be addressed in one project? And as I mentioned, they can. It's just that the single project then needs to address the focus standards in both English and math and meet all the requirements for both English and math. And we actually have special guidance for a combined performance-based pathway, and that is the combined task model. So consult the combined task model, and I'll put a link to that in the chat. The next frequently asked question was about funding. And there was not specific funding that was dedicated to this graduation pathway option. It does have to be delivered within the existing capacity of the district. So that's certainly something that needs planning. The school districts are not required to offer this option, as with any pathway. Districts are not. Districts have control over which pathway options are offered in their district. We do try and encourage districts to offer all pathways if possible, but there isn't specific funding for this graduation pathway. Will this pathway be appropriate for some of our highest needs special education students to access? And I think Maria was going to take this question.
Yeah, I do want to start with the disclaimer that I am not the special education expert at OSPI. That's not my content area, but I did receive some information from them, and they did provide an answer that is available in collaboration with SBE in the FAQ, if you want to check that out. Yes, and I guess to begin with, I want to make sure to say that all of the graduation pathways should be available to our students who receive IEP services. This, of course, should also be one of the options for them. And if they are selecting to take this route as their option for their graduation pathway, they will do the same thing. The teams that are supporting them will do similar that they do to their classroom accommodations, where they determine what kind of supports they may need, how they can help them meet the standards that they're selecting. And that could include an individualized timeline, completing a student experience program, different flexibility for the number of times a student is submitting a product and getting some feedback on it. It really is going to depend on that individual student and the project that they're thinking of completing, but definitely there are ways to support them in completing this pathway, but in no way is this the only pathway for students with IEPs to select, nor should it be something that they're funneled into as like the IEP pathway. They should have access to all of the pathways, but yes, there are ways to support students in completing this pathway with their IEPs.
Let's see, next question. Can the senior capstone project presentation count as this graduation pathway? I think Alyssa was going to take this one.
Maybe, but only if it's adapted to include the required tools and guidance provided on the State Board of Education website. These tools, as you probably saw, include a rubric that will help guide the evaluation process for determining whether the student has met the required standards identified at the state level for the performance-based pathway. But I will say, if your district has a senior capstone project in place, it might very well be a good head start on rebuilding around the performance-based pathway requirements. For number 5, will examples be available? We'd like to make examples available in future years, but we do need your help with this since the pathway is new this year. We are hoping that some of our mastery-based learning collaborative schools, some of which I know will be using the pathway this year, will provide us some examples to share more broadly. And if other schools use the pathway this year, please share examples with us so that we could also share them with districts across the state.
And what documentation needs to be retained? And I think Clarice is going to field this one.
So we are getting closer to unveiling, I guess you can call it, the collection of the student information to show them as met in the pathway database. We are not going to be collecting any documentation. So all documentation needs to be kept at the local level, preferably in the cumulative file for the student or whatever your district decides. So none for us.
Okay, and then let's see. Is the ELA pathway an English language only pathway, or could a student complete the ELA pathway in another language? And
Yes, so
the same question might also apply to math as well.
So we do have a longer answer to this on our FAQ webpage already. But in short, while languages other than English can be incorporated into an ELA performance-based pathway in ways that are authentic to the project and honor the student's home language, or express the student's interest in language other than English, then the project should still allow a student to demonstrate the focus standards in the English language. So SBE and OSPI will continue collaborating on guidance around this, and if anything changes, we'll let the field know. A little bit of a different answer for math. For math, the pathway could be completed in another language, assuming that there are educators that would be available to help assess the student in a language other than English.
All right, so I think folks have been using the Q&A, and we have some questions that are beginning to get asked there. It looks like Alyssa has answered a couple already. Let's start with Karen's question that you answered already, just so that we can point it out to folks. Karen's question wondering about our recently arrived high school age middle multilingual language learners. And it's basically the question that you just answered, Alyssa. So anything that you wanted to add to that answer?
I don't think so. We just put the FAQ page link in that answer again. So if you're trying to look for that longer answer I talked about, then you could look at Karen's question in the Q&A to get that link again.
Okay, and then there's another question that you answered already, Adrienne. Could the locally developed math standards be a project driven and different for each student, or do they need to be the same for all students in the district? And the answer is they are project driven and should be actually unique to each project, or chosen for each student's project. Now, there is a little bit of a caveat in that we do want to allow the option of school districts to actually set up opportunities for students to meet the pathway through opportunities that have sort of been vetted and designed by the district. So if you, for example, if the district has a relationship with a local employer and there's an opportunity for students to do work-based learning or internships, there is certainly the option of the district creating that as an option, offering it as an option for students to use as a performance-based pathway. And in that case, there might be some, some focused and some locally identified standards that are associated with that would be the same for all students who chose that option. All right, so let's start at the top here from Nancy. How are the requirements adjusted for very small rural schools that do not have many options for students, especially students who struggle with online independent classes? I think that, I'll start this, and if any of my other colleagues have more to add, jump in. I think that the nice thing about the performance-based pathway is it is very customizable. So as long as it meets all the requirements that are shown in the guidance, the student can meet their pathway through it. So I'm not sure what else to add. As I mentioned, districts can sort of help the students create the opportunities. So if it is a small rural district that has, say, a nice agricultural program, you could help students identify those options with locally available employers, or that's a possibility. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Okay. So that answered as best we could. Nancy, if you have any follow-up questions, please go ahead and add them. Can a student change pathways throughout their middle school, high school career? And if so, what steps need to be taken to make the adjustment? And they certainly can. I mean, many students will, and what students want to do after high school is likely to change as well. The pathway is intended to reflect what they want to do after high school, but it's not it's not something that needs to be penalized. So if the student has already met a pathway in using, say, the state assessment, indicating the possibility is open to them, that's a career and college ready sort of pathway that they could take the information from the state assessment and continue on to higher education. If their original intent is to go to higher ed and then they decide, well, I actually have a career track, I want to be, a medical assistant, they don't have, they're not locked into a pathway. So basically the pathway should be as flexible as the student's plans.
I would just say, in terms of steps, it may require an update to the high school and beyond because they are supposed to be aligned.
Right. So the first step would be updating the high school and beyond plan. The second would be identifying if there are reasonable pathway options available that align better with their new plans. Why was the project limited to just English and math? I think Randy was going to take this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that getting this pathway in place was a 3-year legislative effort, and it changed significantly over time. The board had continued to advocate for a broader approach on this. And I think it's important to note, though, that the project is not limited to English and math, but that's what's assessed for purposes of meeting the pathway requirement. And so you can do a project that brings in other subject areas, but the assessment is based on meeting the ELA or math standards.
Is there a specific time requirement, a number of hours students have to spend to complete the project? We didn't want to put a hard and fast time requirement on this, but we do think that to do a quality project would probably take about a semester. So, so we do want folks to build in time to be able for students to complete all the components. We think it would be about a semester. Let's see. We have used a different LDA form and format for SPED students that was phased out. Will that be returning? That's really a question I don't know. Do any of my OSPI colleagues have any insight into that?
So Polly, I think we're kind of conflating two different things. So the LDA used to be part of what you were keeping track for the Certificate of Individual Achievement. And so I would defer back to your district to have a conversation about how you're documenting it, how you're using the guidance documents that are provided, and figuring out, is there a different form to use? Could you morph your form into something else? But specifically to the locally determined assessment that used to be used for the CIA, that is gone.
Thank you, Clarice. Next question. Can you help get back to the basics for us around graduation pathway work compared to credit accrual work? And I'm not quite sure what the, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Are you just I can, for graduate, the difference between a graduation pathway and earning the credits for graduation? So I can't remember what slide it was. I apologize, but there was a slide here that went over the graduation requirements in Washington State. And the three that were big that were highlighted, but also includes Washington State history, is earning the credits through class and earning the grades to earn those credits. There's the graduation pathway requirement, which is what has been reviewed here as one of the options. And then there are, wait, ooh, was it just up? There we go. And then the high school and beyond plan completion. So the graduation pathway could definitely include graduation credits that are needed for graduation, especially if they're doing one of the options like dual credit, or they're taking an AP, an IB course that would count for like English credit, as well as counting towards their graduation pathway. But they are separate and they do not have to involve earning credit in a class to meet a pathway requirement. But some options do include that opportunity to earn it that way or meet that requirement that way.
How do the graduation pathways work for non-public agencies working with students with severe disabilities?
Linda, before we go to that, I want, because there's some questions further down in the list about this relationship to credit. So it might just be worth noting on the other side, if a district has a policy for competency or mastery based crediting, then it is possible that the work a student does for this pathway could result in credit. So just it's a nuance, sort of the other side of the coin.
And I would also add that it is possible to embed the performance-based pathway in a credit earning class. So there's some overlap between pathways and credit. Let's see, a question about non-public agencies working with students with severe disabilities. And I'm not sure my colleagues may have things to add here. I think it's something that probably the non-public agency needs to work with the district on to make sure that students have options for pathways. It may be something that the non-public agency can offer, or it may be something that the student needs to see, do through the district. So I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to add.
Probably worth noting that for those who are eligible for it, the YAIM is a pathway, or does meet the pathway requirement.
I agree with Linda. I think it's probably best to have a conversation with the host district for the student to determine what works best on both ends, and documentation as well.
Let's see, will there be a catalog of anchor student projects by which to inform these rubrics by grade level? I noticed a lot of references to the community for different ways of incorporating AI in the recent high school and beyond plan platform survey, but I'm not noticing any reference to AI in this guidance. Yeah, I don't think there is any reference to AI in this guidance. It's an interesting topic. I hadn't really thought about it much. There is not yet a catalog of anchor student projects that would inform these rubrics, but that is something that we could hope to develop over time. Will there be a future project map to include exemplars, best practices from various Washington districts who have student samples or projects, class scope and sequences, so we can all creatively brainstorm together? Bonus question, any creative brainstorming about vendors who can offer curricular tools that could help districts tackle this work? Those are already really good points. I don't think we have them at this point, but it would be a really good thing to have in the future. Next question, must the performance pathway student proposals be evaluated by a certificated teacher? And the performance-based products that the student creates through for their pathway does need to be evaluated by a student who is certificated in either math or English or both, if it's a project that addresses both. The proposal itself does not need to be evaluated or approved by a certificated teacher, but it would probably be a good thing to do. I think that if possible, it would be nice if the evaluators were in on the proposal so that they can ensure that the student has all the elements that they need that will be evaluated. So there does need to be some communication between the people working with the student and the proposal and the evaluators. It can be the same person, but it doesn't need to be. There just needs, the only requirement in the law is that a certificated teacher in English or math has to evaluate the student project. If there is no funding, how do we deal with the inherent inequity between large districts and smaller districts? Doesn't this put rural and low-income school districts at a greater disadvantage? And, you know, I hear you. It's kind of there's always a difference between large districts and small districts. Sometimes small districts have advantages over large districts in offering more individualized programs. For example, more rural districts offer a culminating project. And we do think that that schools that have a well-developed culminating project are further along at being able to offer this as a pathway. So that's one thing that might help, but basically this is, a challenge that is ongoing. Would students use this option in grades 11 or 12, or can it be done at any grade level? And our rules specify that it must be done completed during high school. So we do suspect and expect that mostly it'll be juniors and seniors doing this work. But if a student has a project they want to engage in earlier, it just needs to be completed during high school. Are there any incentives for districts to start offering this pathway? Without funding, what will be their motivation? And I think that one motivation is that this is student driven. It's individualized for students. There are some districts that are already engaged in project-based learning, or that have a culminating project, or are mastery-based learning schools or districts. And their program may fit better with the performance-based pathway.
It will probably be driven a lot by student need. Like if you see that this is the best option, or that a lot of students would benefit from having that would be a lot of the drive. I think personally of one of my older brothers who ended up going to California Institute of the Arts, and he needed to create like a big art portfolio in order to do his admission and not necessarily pass a certain test. And that would have been a great way for him to meet this, is by creating that portfolio, including perspective with math, being able to communicate about his art. So there's a lot of creative ways that it could be used. And I'm pretty excited to see what y'all have coming our way, to see what everyone produces, because there's so many cool ways that this could be implemented.
Are there similar pathway approaches required, available, planned for science and or CTE? And that's a good question. We don't have anything particularly planned, but it's certainly possible that a student could design their performance-based pathway around a science or a CTE topic. It would just need to meet those, address those focus standards in ELA and math. Can an ELA credit, sorry, did you
Oh,
want
I just want to throw in, like, if you look at schools, like I just saw something from Kamehameha schools in Hawaii, that they are doing like ecological surveys of ponds and then sharing the information out on how to increase the fish population. Like, so I see that as one of the ways that I was thinking science could tie in, like being able to communicate what you're finding, making predictions, finding the stats, looking up the history. So yeah, that definitely, to me, I can see a way that would work.
Can an ELA credit be earned through completion of a project as outlined in math and ELA if embedded in a CTE course curriculum, as some CTE courses make available right now? I think you're talking about course equivalency, where you can meet a, say, for example, an ELA ELA graduation requirement for taking a CTE course, or if you're talking about earning credit, then we might be talking about mastery-based crediting.
Another option could be, Linda, if the CTE course has is a CTE dual credit, right? They could possibly have a math or an English state course code that will count that way as well, right? So, but more times, usually they don't, but unless it's an equivalency as well. So.
I also just say that if we're not understanding your question and you need additional clarification, will you add another question to the chat?
You mentioned that you encourage all districts to offer all pathways, but is not funded. How does that look for small rural schools? And I just hear you, small rural schools may be very challenged in offering all pathways. It's aspirational that we'd like all schools to offer all pathways.
I also think that it might be worth reaching out to your local ESD. I know there are some ESDs that are thinking about, are there ways that they could provide certificated educators for assessment of these pathways? I don't think any have agreed to do that yet, but I know there's been interest across the state around that. So I would certainly encourage you to reach out to your ESD.
Let's see, how many years must a district keep the documentation?
I got this one. It depends, Kevin. So we would default to your district records retention schedule, but if you asked OSPI, right, OSPI keeps records for 7 years. Sometimes it's different at the local level, and especially with some districts going with digital, right, you could be able to maybe work differently that way.
Is this option being considered when looking at the revision of a universal high school and beyond plan for annual review graduation?
It will definitely be included. That is a requirement. I'm trying to make sure that I understand the question completely. All graduation pathways have to be a part of the high school and beyond plan. So if we do have that new universal system that gets adopted, not sure when the timeline would be for that actually being implemented in schools, but it would definitely be included. And we want to make sure that that has been a really high ask, making sure that we can track and be able to provide information about graduation pathways through that system once it's in existence.
And I love this next question because I'm kind of a nerd. There seems to be a stronger connection between the current performance-based pathway and the collection of evidence circa 2007. Successfully used COE for many students. What are the similarities and differences between the performance-based pathway and the collection of evidence? And does a district need a specific board policy regarding PBP? And I'll answer the last question first because that's very clear cut. Yes, you do need a board policy. I think we'll be distributing my slide deck. There is a reference to the WASDA model policy that districts could adopt to offer the performance-based pathway. But yes, a district does need a policy. Now, the similarities and differences between the performance-based pathway and collection of evidence is just right up my alley. I love this kind of thing. Okay, one of the main differences that I would say is that the performance-based pathway is evaluated locally. So unlike the collections of evidence that were all collected and there was a big grading party at the ESD in Olympia. So I think that's one of the one main difference. The performance-based pathway is more flexible. It's more student-driven. Students choose their own project that aligns with their high school and beyond plan, what they want to do after high school, so it's meaningful for them. I was a fan of the collection of evidence in some ways because some districts did it really well. And I think it was meaningful for students. So I hope that the performance-based pathway takes some of the best elements of the collection of evidence. I'd love to learn about an example of how schools might be individualizing selection of standards for each student versus how schools might pre-select a narrow set of standards that all students who select this pathway would need to demonstrate in their PBB. I can see that there could be greater fidelity and consistency in evaluating with fewer standards with a local assessment. Is there guidance on approaching this? It's really a question regarding very broad versus narrowed standards for students to select from in completing their performance-based pathway. I think that in developing this guidance, it was felt by folks who were had more expertise than mine that really it was a small number of standards that could be addressed authentically. So there are certain standards in the guidance that must be addressed, and then there is flexibility in choosing additional standards. And I think the guiding principle in choosing those additional standards should be based on the student's project. To confirm, do teachers with the required endorsements need to be employed by the district that the student is graduating from? Are there terms, advisors, mentors, teachers being used interchangeably? I think, let's see, the people doing the evaluation must be endorsed in those subject areas, English or math. So that's really the only requirement. They do not need to be employed by the district. It is possible that you could have teams of evaluators from different districts. It also, if it's possible, it's, no ESD has agreed to this, but if there was an evaluator at an ESD, they could evaluate multiple projects from different districts, The advisor, mentor, and the advisor and mentor we tried to be careful in the guidance because the advisor and mentor does not need to be an educator. We wanted to leave the door open for involved community members or employers to be the advisor or mentor. So the advisor and mentor is somebody who works with the student to make sure that they're going through the steps and completing their project. And so the advisor or mentor helping the student could be a teacher, it could be a counselor, it could be a community member, and it could be somebody with the endorsement in English or math or not. The evaluator of the project must be somebody with the endorsement, but they don't need to be employed by the district. Does that make sense? Do you know of school districts who are currently offering for class of 2024 or planning to offer for subsequent classes a standalone course elective credit to support students in completing this performance-based pathway? I don't know of any. Does anyone else?
I do actually, although not as an elective credit. I know one of the Mastery-Based Learning Collaborative school districts is planning to offer this in their senior year ELA course, just to build this into the course, which I think is a fantastic idea. So that's the example that I know of.
Yeah, I think it is still pretty early, so I'm not sure. And the guidance is just coming out, so folks that are even thinking of offering it this year haven't had all their information available yet, so we don't really know. Do the rubrics need to be scored by a certificated teacher? Do they need to be math or ELA teacher? Could it be an employer who is not a certificated teacher? And the rubrics, the final evaluation does need a certificated teacher with an endorsement in math or ELA. Now, the process is open up that the student and their advisor or mentor could go through the evaluation processes multiple times before a final evaluation and a determination of that the student has met the requirement or not is made. So we do actually want the student to get to their evaluation and not have it be a surprise about whether they passed or not. So where specifically do I find the requirements of the district policy? And I would refer you back to WASDA. Well, the requirements of the district policy are mentioned in our rules. We'll drop a link to the rules in the chat. But there is, as I mentioned, a model policy. Let's see, it's WASDA model policy 2415. So we'll also put a link to WASDA in the chat as well.
And I did want to say, Holly very helpfully let us know that even though it's not publicly posted, if you are logged in, you have a login for the WASDA website, then it was available there already. It's just not posted unless you're logged in as a member.
Alyssa, do they have to be a member to get this policy? I know some require that and some don't.
I'm not sure. I think so, or else I think it would be publicly posted. I don't know that to be a fact.
Abigail at WASDA let me know that members have it available. Non-members can contact her and get a copy. I'm in a very rural district, and we have a student looking at a performance pathway based on their work on a farm, math involved in planning, planting, chemicals, and then writing involved in goal setting and possible outcomes for wheat prices and such. Does this seem okay? That seems like it could do it. Now it's incumbent on looking at the guidance and making sure all of those standards are met, but that sounds like a very good scenario. is there a prescribed year that they could meet their performance-based pathway requirement? Could this be accomplished in a 10th or 11th grade, or could this be extended from 11th to 12th grade? And I think it's up to local determination. It needs to be completed in high school, but it could be completed in 1 year. It could be extended over multiple years if sort of local policy permits, local practice permits. Does it have to be a certificate? I think I answered that one already. Can a district's mastery credit policy be morphed to include the elements for the performance-based pathway rather than creating a standalone pathway policy, because none of the other pathways have a policy? So it feels weird. You're right, Holly. This is at least WASDA has created a standalone policy, but I think that if a district wanted to morph it into the mastery-based policy or morph it into an overarching graduation requirement policy, you could do that. But right now, it's a standalone model policy from WASDA that districts could adopt.
Yeah, and Holly, you obviously know where to find us. So if you want to chat more about that, feel free to contact us. Fine. I'll put my email into chat. No, I know you know where to find me, Holly. If other folks have questions about mastery credit policies in particular and trying to combine those, you could reach out to me about that.
Let's see. Let's see, is there a direct resource, or is the best action to reach out to a school currently doing such? I think that's probably referring to something we've been talking about. I'm not sure I understand the question. If parents have opted out of WAAIM, how does that look regarding the NPA option?
Linda, I think I think really the key point here is that students have to meet one of the pathways, while AIM is one way to meet it. So if they've opted out of that option, they have to meet one of the other pathways.
This is just for feedback's sake. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the extensive guidance on this new pathway. However, since the legislature did not provide funding, the implementation will be a struggle. It's true we don't have to use this, but the objective is to provide students with another option. The requirements of this guidance will absolutely overwhelm already overburdened small districts. And again, we hear you. It is always a challenge for smaller districts or districts that have fewer resources. And I think looking forward, we'll try and just continue to build on the guidance and tools that we have available to at least help with implementation of the different pathways. Can a student complete the performance-based pathway anytime? And yes, they can complete it anytime during their high school years. With the requirement of a CERT staff member to evaluate, the majority of our school districts in Washington are millions in the whole. I don't understand how this pathway is an option for the majority of districts, small or large. I don't know that there is any funding that would be specific to a particular pathway. I think, I don't know, anyone have anything to add on funding?
I would just say when the original bill to implement pathways passed, it was the same thing. There was no specific funding to support implementation of pathways.
Can multiple small projects be completed and combined to meet all requirements and standards for both ELA and math? Yeah, that's a good question. I think there needs to be sort of a common theme in that it needs to meet what this, needs to support what the student wants to do after high school. But I think it would be okay to complete a performance-based pathway in little steps, just as long as all the steps added together to meet the requirements.
Just in order to track, I would assume you may want to still create a portfolio with all those pieces, so it's all in one place.
Aha, question about extending the pathway waiver for ELA and math one more year. And I meant to talk about this earlier in the presentation because this is a question that we're getting there. The pathway waiver is not directly related to the performance-based pathway, but this is a question we're getting a lot. So to deal with that, the board is considering proposed rules. They'll be considering adoption of proposed rules at their April board meeting. And the proposed rules do modify the current waiver so that in addition to a waiver of 1 credit, it would also allow the waiver of the pathway requirement, provided that that if a student had waived a credit in English, they cannot also waive an English pathway. And if they have waived a credit in math, they cannot also waive a math pathway. So if they have, if they want to waive, say, a math pathway, they need to have met their math credit requirements.
I have
So
a follow-up question, Linda. What about a half credit? If they did half credit English, half credit math, and do they have the option to waive the pathway?
No, I think they need to have met their full credit requirements in math before you could consider waiving a math pathway. Let's see.
I just put out information about the hearing for those rules in chat.
Thank you. So one other thing I want to mention is that prior to considering granting a student the emergency waiver, the district needs to have made a good faith effort to support the student in meeting all graduation requirements. So the decision about whether the waiver is available or not will be made in April. But until then, towards the end of the year, you really should be helping students try to meet all the graduation requirements without a waiver. So I do know that a lot of folks will feel more secure knowing that the waiver is available, but really it doesn't change what you're doing right now, which is helping kids to meet the graduation requirements without a waiver. But the decision will happen in April.
And can I add to that? Much like previous years, if it passes, the GRU is not cohort based, it is school year based. So a student who is awarded either or waived credit or the pathway, like in previous years, the student must graduate and complete all their other requirements by August 31st. If the student does not, graduate, sorry, by August 31st. If not, if they return the following year or haven't completed it, the GRU credit waived or pathway waived does not apply.
All right, next question is from Polly. I work in a rural district with a few students working with DVR on school to work, and it aligns with the high school and beyond plan. Can that be a possible pathway? First of all, I'm not, what is DVR?
So they, that's the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So they provide some transition services to students who are receiving special education and or qualify as having a disability. I definitely, based on what I know about their programming, feel like that would, as long as you meet the rest of the requirements, like they're identifying those ELA or math standards that they're meeting and you're tracking. I don't see why that wouldn't be able to be incorporated, especially with some of their work-based learning opportunities.
If I'm reading this correctly, it looks like students can present their project orally. If they choose this option, other than the rubric, what evidence would we need to keep on file to show competency? And I think you could keep on file what you want to, but I think that the student, so the student project would be the evidence. So if they present orally in a presentation and you don't record the presentation, that's fine. It can still be evaluated as long as your evaluator is sitting there, and then the rubric becomes the documentation. All of the ELA pieces do require some written work, and so of course the written work would also be documentation as well. So I think that the documentation of the performance-based pathway is the student project and the rubric. Is there anything else that I'm missing there that any other one would, anyone else would identify? Okay. Another clarifying question about the emergency waiver. Is there any talk around extending the pathway waiver for both ELA and math, not just one or the other? Not the way the current proposed rules are written.
Linda,
Yeah.
correct me. I think if a student has not have a credit waiver in either subject, then they could, because the pathway is not always ELA or math.
Right.
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 So they actually could waive the pathway if they have neither a credit waiver in either of the other subjects. Where the ELA math becomes important in the pathway waiver is when they've waived one of those courses.
Exactly. And just to be clear, you could waive a pathway in ELA and math, and you could still waive an elective credit or social studies credit or another subject area credit. You just couldn't waive a math or ELA credit. Right, it looks like, let's see, the questions and answers have largely been addressed, I think. Let me, let's see, we're at 10:15. Feel free to, okay. All right, the waiver language said math or ELA could be waived. So when it comes to the emergency waiver, the proposed rules say that you could waive a ELA pathway, but or math or ELA, but you just can't waive a credit in the same content area. Tara, if it's still, I'm getting a little wound up here, so I would be happy to take this offline. So if you'd like to email me, I'd be happy to answer anything online.
Yeah, I would say it's confusing because two of the pathways are not ELA or math. You have CTE and ASVAB, which are just a pathway. And so essentially CTE or ASVAB are not available if you waive one of the courses, but you can waive the pathway if you waive neither ELA or math courses. And so it is super confusing on that point, but really it's that relationship. If this only comes into play for students that have a waiver in either the core requirement in math or English, and it's really the credit requirement that's driving what happens on the pathway waiver.
You want to also reiterate that at this point, these are just proposed rules. And we do have a public hearing coming up around those rules. We can put information around the public hearing in chat before a final decision is made at the April board meeting.
Yeah, it's actually already in chat. So yeah.
Oh, perfect. There you go.
All right. All right, any additional questions about the performance-based pathway? One thing I wanted to mention is that our partners in developing the guidance, Great Schools Partnership, have also been asked and will create some video guidance on the on these documents, and that video guidance will be available mid-April. So so the purpose of this was to kind of roll out the guidance, get folks looking at it. Their video presentations will probably focus in more on how do you use these documents? How do you fill out the rubric? It'll be more focused on the actual documents themselves. Okay, any final questions? Well, thank you all for participating in this, and thank you all for your patience as we've answered a lot of questions, and sorry for any confusion about the way we answered questions, but we really do appreciate it. We're excited about this new pathway option, and we're always available to take questions by email or offline. So thank you once again. And I think we'll just leave it open for 2 more minutes to see if there's any final questions, and then we will say good night and goodbye and have a great rest of your day.
Linda, there is a question in chat. Linda, you're muted.
Is that the one about the emergency waiver?
Yes.
Yes. So if you waive no credits, you can waive both ELA and math. Yes.
If the rules are adopted in April, we have to
Yes.
put that caveat in there.
Yes.
These rules are not yet adopted.
Okay, it doesn't look like any additional questions have come in. So thank you all, and we'll close down the webinar. Thank you.